Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello, Happy New Year and welcome to the Briefing PM, your fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. Coming up, I'm going to be speaking to Conservative MPs about the potential impact in regards to what is going to happen with further restrictions. Also, we'll be looking at what the Scottish Health Advisor has been saying on COVID curbs and what can we expect from politics in the United States this year, with the lowdown from a former chief spokesman to President Trump. That and so much more over the next hour. But first at 3, let's get the news with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date at 3 o'clock. Boris Johnson is warning the NHS faces considerable pressure over the coming weeks due to increasing COVID cases. The Prime Minister says although Omicron is plainly milder than other variants, it continues to surge through the country. Mr Johnson is ruling out a reduction in the self-isolation period to 5 days, claiming the risk of an infectious person returning to work is just too high. On a visit to a vaccination hub in Buckinghamshire, he urged everyone who's not yet had their booster to get one.
Make a crucial point to people who are thinking about getting their booster. There are still quite a lot of people who have had 2 jabs but haven't had the third. A third jab really does make a big difference. There are 2 million slots just this week to get your booster, so get boosted now. It can make all the difference in the world. The majority of people who are in ICU, sadly, have not been vaccinated, and certainly the vast majority, about 90%, have not been boosted.
Secondary school pupils in England are being told to take COVID tests before starting the new term. Face masks will be mandatory in school for students for at least the next 3 weeks, and classes may be merged if too many teachers are off sick. The new rules are being introduced by the Education Secretary to try to curb the spread of Omicron. Nadeem Zahawi says schools must do everything they can to protect face-to-face learning.
Want to keep Omicron out of the classroom and students in the classroom, and not for a day longer. As soon as we see that we can transition this particular variant from where we are today, where obviously London was the epicenter, but it's now rising in other parts of the country. As soon as we make sure that staff absenteeism is under control, we were at 8% at the end of last year. Then I don't want children to be wearing masks.
Legal documents are being made public that Prince Andrew's lawyers hope will end the civil sex abuse case against him. The Duke of York's legal team say the proceedings should be thrown out because of a 2009 settlement between Virginia Giuffre and the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Ms Giuffre alleges that Prince Andrew sexually assaulted her when she was 17. The Prince denies any wrongdoing. Royal commentator Jenny Bond says Prince Andrew's not facing a criminal trial.
It's a civil law case, and a judge, and if it comes to it, a jury will rule. And I think the man is innocent until proven guilty. That is the way we work, and we should be careful of that. But there's no doubt that his judgment, if nothing else, has been called into question by the fact that he has had friendships not with just one sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein, but now we know 2, a very long-standing friendship with Ghislaine Maxwell, which goes back to university days.
Tributes have been paid to a 14-year-old girl who died after being hit by a suspected drug driver on New Year's Eve. Olivia Kolek was struck by a grey Mercedes in Rowley Regis in the West Midlands, and she died at the scene. Her family say she was the brightest star in their lives. A 39-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of causing death by driving while under the influence of drugs. He's been released under investigation pending further inquiries. Ministers are being urged to bring in a new law that would guarantee all workers 2 weeks of paid leave after a bereavement. The SNP's Patricia Gibson is bringing forward a private member's bill to Westminster. She says it would allow people time to grieve without worrying about financial pressures. 2 people are missing after wildfires in the US. Flames in Colorado spread over an area of 9 square miles, destroying nearly 1,000 homes and buildings. Police don't know yet what caused the blaze, and investigators say they haven't ruled out arson. An internet watchdog reports a 6-fold increase to visits to websites that promote violence towards women in the UK last year. They're Incel websites or involuntary celibate forums that promote hatred towards women. The Centre for Countering Digital Hate says there were more than 638,000 hits every month on 3 of the largest sites. That's up from over 114,000 the year before. You are up to date here on GB News. I'll have the latest headlines for you in half an hour. Now back to the briefing with Darren.
Yeah, very good afternoon. Welcome to the programme on this Bank Holiday Monday, and a very happy new year to you at home. Coming up in the next hour or so, we'll be speaking to Tom Hunt, Conservative MP, about what potentially the government might need to do next to tackle the spread of Omicron, including, of course, that announcement about face masks in secondary schools. In Scotland, a top health advisor said that COVID curbs could last until the spring. We'll be speaking to a Scottish MSP about that. And a new poll today suggesting that 62% of Americans don't want to see President Trump run again in the United States. We'll be looking ahead to what could be a very difficult year for President Biden with former President Trump's spokesperson, Jason Miller. That and much more. Do get in touch, as always. Particularly keen to hear what you'd like to see in politics or what the big issues are in 2022. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews, and we'll get to some of your views a little later in the programme. Very good afternoon and welcome. Let's start with our top story, though, and that is that plans to force children to wear face masks in secondary school were hit by a backlash on Sunday night as figures showed a fall in the number of new COVID cases. Tory MPs, government scientific advisor, charities and parents group warned of long-term impact of masks on children's mental health and said that restrictions must be balanced against the risks of the virus. It comes as data shows that new cases in England dropped by almost a quarter on Sunday after 5 days of successive rises. Daily COVID hospital admissions also fell by a quarter in 2 days, declining from 2,370 on Wednesday to 1,781 on Friday. Well, earlier the Prime Minister explained why he'd held off a decision to implement new restrictions so far. He was speaking outside a vaccination centre.
I think we've got to recognise that the pressure on our NHS, on our hospitals, is going to be considerable in the course of the next couple of weeks and maybe more, because there's no question that Omicron continues to surge through the country. There's a couple of important points. It is plainly milder than previous variants, but we're also in a different position. We've got Plan B in place. People should never forget that. We've got the measures that we're using, making people wear masks on public transport, in confined places where you're meeting people you don't normally meet. Those types of restriction, working from home if you can. But we're also continuing the massive booster rollout, which you can see happening here in Aylesbury today. And not just the booster rollout, but the vaccination programme for those who haven't yet even had their first or second vaccination. I just want to make a crucial point to people who are thinking about getting their booster. There are still quite a lot of people who have had 2 jabs but haven't had the third. A third jab really does make a big difference. There are 2 million slots just this week to get your booster, so get boosted now. It can make all the difference in the world. The majority of people who are in ICU, sadly, have not been vaccinated, and certainly the vast majority, about 90%, have not been boosted.
Tell me, you say that the data doesn't support further restrictions, but there's increasing pressure on hospitals. Do you accept it is a gamble?
I think the way forward for the country as a whole is to continue with the path that we're on. We'll keep everything under review. Of course, we keep all measures under review, but the mixture of things that we're doing at the moment is, I think, the right one. So number one, continue with Plan B, make sure that people take it seriously, do what we can to stop the spread, use the Plan B measures, work from home if you can, wear a mask on public transport, be sensible about, take a test before going out to meet people you don't normally meet, think about the requirements under Plan B, but also get the booster. And I think that's the difference between the UK and so much of the rest of Europe and perhaps the rest of the world. We have a very, very high level of vaccination now, and we need to continue very fast to build up those defences and that protection in the population. About almost 34 million people, 33.9 million people across the UK have had a booster. Amongst the 70 to 75 group, you're looking at over 90% of people have had it. Huge numbers, I think 76% of adults. 76% of adults. So everybody who's thinking about it, get a booster and you're joining the vast majority.
Lincolnshire hospitals have declared a critical incident now over staff shortages. Is that a major factor in terms of further restrictions, staff shortages?
We've got to make sure that we look after our NHS in any way that we can. And I talked this morning to Amanda Pritchard and Steve Powis and all those who are running the NHS. I appreciate the pressures that our hospitals are under. I think it's vital that we make sure that we help them by trying to contain the pandemic in the ways that I've set out. So do all the things that I've said, make sure we follow Plan B, get boosted, but also help the NHS with their staffing requirements, and we're looking at what we can do to move people into those areas that are particularly badly affected. But don't forget that no matter how incredibly transmissible Omicron is, and there's no question it really spreads very, very fast, it is different from previous variants, and it does seem pretty conclusively to be less severe than Delta or Alpha, and it is putting fewer people into ICU. And sadly, the people who are getting into ICU are the people who aren't boosted. So get boosted.
Your thoughts on cutting isolation to 5 days, as they have done in the United States?
When you look at what we've got, in effect, it's very close to that kind of limit anyway, because you're out on 1 in the morning or just 1 minute past midnight on the day that you test negative. We'll continue to look at the infectivity periods, but the key thing is we don't want to be releasing people back into the workplace when they're still infectious. And the risk is you'd increase the numbers of people going back into the workplace who are infectious by a factor of 3. So you might perversely have a negative effect on the workforce, if you see what I mean. So that's the argument we're looking at.
A word about face masks in
Yes.
schools. As children go back to school, pupils go back to colleges this week, face masks in schools in England, some of your MPs have been saying that the efficacy is questionable about them. What would you say to that?
On the other hand, there's increasing body of scientific support for the idea that face masks can contain transmission. We don't want to keep them on. I don't like the idea of having face masks in classroom any more than anybody else does. We won't keep them on a day more than is necessary.
And just one final question, Prime Minister. Are we at the beginning of the end of the pandemic now?
I think that the UK is in a much stronger position than this time last year, and there's no doubt at all. And that is basically because of science and because of vaccination. And my view is that Omicron is, and it seems to be borne out by all the evidence, Omicron is much milder, considerably milder than previous variants, and we're much more boosted. So our position is far, far better. But I think this is what I would say to everybody, looking at the pressures on the NHS in the next couple of weeks, and maybe longer, looking at the numbers of people who are going to be going into hospital, it would be absolute folly to say that this thing is all over now by the shouting. We've got to remain cautious. We've got to stick with Plan B. We've got to get boosted.
There you go, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, speaking a little earlier, saying it would be absolute folly, as you heard there, to say that the pandemic is over, but that Omicron is plainly milder than other variants, though suggesting we are going to see a big increase in hospitalisations in the days and weeks to come across the country. Let's speak to Conservative MP Tom Hunt, who joins us now. Good afternoon to you, Tom, and a Happy New Year. First of all, you're on the Education Select Committee. Can I ask about face masks on pupils? The government and the Education Secretary today making the case that they feel it is necessary to allow schools to try and continue to operate as normal.
Well, I think, firstly, I think it's at least something that they haven't been introduced into, or they haven't been recommended for use in primary schools. I think that's something. But I do have quite significant concerns about the recommendation that they should be worn by children essentially at all times of the day. I think there's a difference between saying face masks should be worn when you're walking between lessons, perhaps in busy corridors, and actually you should continue to wear those face masks when you're sat down in your classroom. I mean, I think that could lead you to be, wearing a face mask for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And I think I'm struggling to find if somebody else would expect to be doing it. I also think there's some very specific concerns about young people with learning special educational needs, autism, for example, and how they may be particularly adversely impacted by this. I definitely think the idea of teachers wearing face masks when they're trying to carry out a lesson is ridiculous. And I've heard some examples of this happening, and I really hope that is just an isolated example.
The real concern here, though, Tom, seems to be that actually lots of teachers may well get the virus themselves, which means they have to isolate, which means then the kids might have no one to teach them. And we don't want to end up in that situation again, where the school network in some ways falls over.
Well, of course, we're talking here about teachers who have, I suspect, have overwhelmingly had their booster jab, and we're talking about a particular variant of COVID, which the Prime Minister said is considerably milder than other variants. So I don't think this is an illness or a virus that teaching staff should be scared of personally if they've been boosted. I think there is a question mark about the 7-day self-isolation requirement. I've heard what the Prime Minister said there about it not being reduced to 5 days. I understand what he was saying, but of course, this has now happened in the United States and other countries. So I think that does need to continue to be looked at. But it seems to me strange that the main pressure being put on the NHS isn't actually, huge numbers of people getting really, really ill who have been vaccinated, but actually it's people self-isolating, people who may well not be that ill at all from COVID and maybe experiencing cold-like symptoms, being asked to self-isolate for such a long period of time. We wouldn't ask people with a common cold to self-isolate, would we?
Well, the Prime Minister, of course, suggesting there, wasn't he, that he feels that it could actually make things worse if people were to go back sooner. And we know that people are ending up in hospital, though, Tom. In certain parts of the country, hospitalisations have more than doubled in the past week or so, and infection cases across the country are still continuing to grow. Do you think this gamble, and it is a gamble by the Prime Minister, is going to pay off?
I think he's made absolutely the right call. I think the Prime Minister deserves quite a lot of credit for the fact that he hasn't introduced any further restrictions ahead of Christmas and ahead of New Year's Eve. I think that the indications are that he made the correct assessment. I think there is pressure on our hospitals, but it doesn't seem to me to be anywhere near unsustainable. At the end of the day, we're talking about a pandemic we've been living with for 21 months. We're talking about lockdown restrictions that are not without consequence, lockdown restrictions that have had a huge economic impact on people's livelihoods and have crippled the mental health of millions of people up and down the country. So for me, there is just no justification for any further restrictions to our lives, liberties and livelihoods. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. In fact, I really hope we can get to a point very soon where we can have this sort of big watershed moment where a Prime Minister can say, actually, not only we're not going to introduce restrictions now, but permanently, we are not going to look at these restrictions as an option. It is not a long-term, sustainable way of dealing with COVID because we know this isn't the last variant. So we've got to give people and communities and businesses certainty to plan and live their lives with confidence, knowing that the blunt instrument of lockdown restrictions will never be used again.
But isn't the problem here that, the NHS, as we all admit, is under severe pressure? In certain parts of the country, Lincolnshire hospitals today declaring a critical incident because they haven't got enough staff members, and in point because they've got increasing patient numbers. We've had 21 months, you're right, of this virus, and that's meant doctors, nurses, NHS staff under enormous strain for those 21 months. Can you and other MPs like you look hospital workers in the eye and say that we shouldn't have further restrictions that might ease their workloads, that might help them out, that might help the National Health Service at a very, very difficult time?
I think if we look at some of the things that would happen if we introduced lockdown type restrictions now, I think firstly what would happen is the economy would take another huge hit. So the ability of the economy to move, to grow and to fund public services such as the NHS would be severely undermined by more lockdown restrictions. I also think what we'd see if we introduce more lockdown restrictions is it would add to the mental health crisis, which would again put more pressure on the NHS. So you can look at this in different ways. But there have been some encouraging signs in London. Omicron surged in London before it surged anywhere else. Hospital admissions increased in London ahead of where it did anywhere else. And there are some signs that in London things may be calming down. So yes, our hospitals are under pressure. And I must add that our hospitals are under pressure every winter. This has been the case for the last decade or so, or for longer than. So this happens every winter. But it doesn't mean that the response to our hospitals being under pressure is to shut down our society, to severely undermine people's livelihoods. That should not be on the table. That should not be on the shelf when it comes to these pressures at particular times of the year, in my view. And I think in the view of a growing percentage of the population who, in my view, were accepting of lockdown restrictions early doors, particularly before the vaccine, but right now are totally fed up with the restrictions. And I think we do need to get to that point where we have that watershed moment where we say, no more. We've got to get on. We've got to live with COVID. Living with COVID is not periodically introducing restrictions every time a new variant of concern comes along. That is not living with COVID. And I really hope...
Tom, before we let you go, what I get a sense therefrom is that the Prime Minister should not now introduce any more restrictions. We know they're going to review the data, I think, either tomorrow or on Wednesday. But your sense, your message almost to government is that we will get through this. No more restrictions, please.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that if you're introducing more restrictions, what we're talking about is huge numbers of businesses out of business. We're talking about huge numbers of people out of work. And we're talking about, blighted life chances, young people's opportunities to develop being further curtailed. No, absolutely not. We do not need any more restrictions. We've got to deal with this challenge in a way which does not involve shutting down society. It was an extraordinary thing that happened a while ago before we had a vaccine, but this is not something that should continue.
Hey, Tom, appreciate your time, and as I say, Happy New Year to you. That's Tom Hunt there, the Conservative MP for Ipswich, joining us down the line. OK, we're going to pause there on the briefing. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to go to Scotland, where the conversation appears to be very different. Suggestions the restrictions there could last into the spring. We'll be talking to one MSP, and we'll be going to the United States too to look ahead to the year in politics. That and so much more coming up in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned. But first, on this Bank Holiday Monday, let's get a look at the weather across the UK.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Well, it's going to be largely dry in the south with some rain and hill snow further north. Zooming in, if we can, to the southwest, it'll be largely dry, though it will be rather cloudy this evening, remaining mild, though temperatures will still remain in double figures. If we head to the southeast of England and East Anglia, it'll be dry this evening, but again, a fair amount of cloud across the area. There are outbreaks of rain across Wales as we end on Monday. There we're going to get to Wales, aren't we? But northern areas could see some clear spells develop. The Midlands this evening should be largely dry, although southern areas will remain cloudy and mild. The North Midlands may see some clear spells, but it'll be a little colder. Moving up to northern England, we'll see a band of rain and hill snow move southwards across the area. Behind the rain, it will be turning much cloudier. Cold area across Scotland with some blustery showers across the north, giving the risk of some icy patches. Further south, though, it will be dry, but it will quickly turn to frost. Going to be noticeably cooler over the next few days, as you can see. It'll also be cooler and clearer across Northern Ireland this evening, with any rain quickly clearing across the south of the country. A few showers may follow, though, on the north coasts. And the weather tomorrow is shaping up to be not too dissimilar from today, but as I say, colder than we've had for the last couple of days.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News home and security editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Very welcome back to the briefing, the first one of 2022. It is 3:27. Thank you for your company on this bank holiday Monday. Now, for those in England, this year's festivities were relatively restriction-free, but that does not mean that everyone in England went out to celebrate. Some people may feel that the Omicron variant is still too scary. Well, in a moment, we'll look at the rather less festive situation in Scotland. But first, our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, went out to Grantham to find out what people thought about the festive period and how they celebrated Christmas and New Year's.
We spent Christmas Day on our own, me and my husband, at our house. We didn't see our family, and that was in order to then be able to celebrate for New Year's Eve. So we had quite a quiet Christmas this year. We didn't go to any bars or pubs, and then New Year's Eve we went to a big party and did tests before we went.
We went out New Year's Eve afternoon, so I was at a local restaurant, the wife and I, because she works retail, so she was working the following day. So we were eating and drinking in the afternoon. The kids, who are both grown up now, were out in the pubs in the evening.
We would usually probably go to the pub for a few drinks, but we didn't this year because obviously COVID is still around, this new variant, and we just wanted to keep our family as safe as possible.
We went out for meals and we also had Christmas with the family. We didn't really alter any plans, and the reason for that was because we're all vaccinated. As requested by the government, and we just took precautions as and when needed.
Because of mine and my husband's age, we feel a lot more vulnerable, so we prefer not to go to places. We could have gone to somewhere on New Year's Eve, which is very close to us, but we chose not to.
Normally I would go out and about and possibly go to a football match and things like that, but not now, no.
I spent it with my daughter. Only one son came with me, so there's only 3 of us, and we didn't go out socialising, and although I've been boosted, I feel a bit safer having that.
We felt really confident about New Year's. Obviously we had loads of family and friends around, and we really enjoyed doing what we were doing. Like, there was karaoke involved, everyone was just having fun, and although there was like old people like my girlfriend's nana there involved, like we weren't afraid of Omicron at all. Like, it was just us being together, like in unity, you know, in harmony and peace. So there was nothing to be afraid of, mate, honestly.
This is the new future. Just get on with it. Wear your mask when you go into a restaurant. Sit down, then take it off and have your meal or drink or whatever. And use a bit of common sense. Life has got to get on. We've got to get on with it.
The people of Grantham, they're in the Midlands. Well, let's turn our attention now to Scotland, where a row has broken out over Scotland's National Clinical Director suggesting that large-scale events could be restricted there for another 3 months. Clinical Director Jason Leach dismissed calls to reschedule Edinburgh's Hogmanay party to April, arguing that it would be too soon to authorise mass celebrations. This has caused panic amongst businesses across the country, as the government had previously said restrictions would only last for 3 weeks. Well, to discuss this now is the MSP for the Highlands and Islands, Sir Edward Mountain. Very good afternoon to you, Edward. Happy New Year. First of all, has Jason Leach spoken out of line, or do you think that's the view held by the government there at Holyrood's?
Well, first of all, good afternoon to you and your viewers. I don't think Jason's spoken out of line. I think he's expressed an opinion, but his opinion is not what has been chosen as the direction for Scotland. It was agreed at the last session that we'd have a meeting of Parliament on the 5th of January, which is just on Wednesday, to discuss the way forward. And what's really important is it's that Parliament decides that, and not just one person. And therefore, I think it's unhelpful to voice these opinions until Parliament have the figures and data in front of them, which, when we last met, we didn't have.
When looking at that data now, and we have got a slightly fuller picture, not a full picture, but a slightly fuller picture of the situation in Scotland, but also throughout the rest of the UK. What's your sense of where we're at in terms of the spread of this new variant and the consequences on hospitals?
Well, it's absolutely clear that the new variant is much easier to transmit. But what we're seeing, and certainly across the Highlands, and I'm seeing the figures from NHS Highlands, is that the figures of those people in intensive care are very low, and those people that are in hospital are relatively low. The problem is, I think as your last interviewer suggested, the problem is the staffing in the hospital because of the isolation, the delay, and getting those people into hospital to carry out the work on the patients. That's the problem.
So where does that leave us with restrictions, Sir Edwards? Should we, in essence, stick with a more cautious approach that Nicola Sturgeon has, or, as his critics, or even some of the supporters would suggest, the gamble that Boris Johnson's taking?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. The economy is really important to Scotland. It's important to our health and well-being. And it's really important that we don't just shut down the economy. What we've got to do is find a balanced approach. And I'm not in favour of further restrictions unless there is a clear evidence that they're needed. And as I said to you at the last meeting of the Parliament just before Christmas, after Christmas, we didn't have the data in front of us. So when the First Minister was asked how many people were in hospital because of COVID, she was unable to give that figure. She was able to give a figure of people in hospital with COVID. Now, some of those could have been in there and have been diagnosed with COVID as a result. And she was unable to give the figures of those people in intensive care that were there because of COVID. And I think these are the figures that we need to know, and we need to have a clear discussion. And there's a balance that needs to be achieved between what is required for the NHS and what is required to allow us to continue our lives, and a balance with the economy and people's mental well-being. I don't believe lockdowns are in anyone's benefit as far as their mental health is concerned.
Are you then suggesting that rather than Nicola Sturgeon looking at more restrictions, are you saying that she should be looking at lifting the current restrictions that are in place in Scotland, or at least easing some of them?
No, what I'm saying is for me to be able to, and let's be clear, people in Scotland have abided by, and in some cases the restrictions have been much tighter than they have been in England, and they've done so happily because they've known the figures. But now we don't know the figures, now we don't know the details. We don't want more restrictions unless we know they're justified. And what I'm saying to you and to your viewers is that it would be useful if the Parliament in Scotland had those figures so elected members of the Parliament could understand and see whether there's a need for those restrictions rather than just restrictions being put in place or being muted. I don't think muting them without discussing them with business or without discussing them with parliamentarians is helpful.
Now, some people have accused Nicola Sturgeon of being political in some of these decisions, that she wants to differentiate herself from the government of Westminster, most notably from Boris Johnson. Do you think that has been the case, or do you think actually it's been a sensible course of action for the Scottish Government, the Welsh Assembly, the Executive in Northern Ireland to take a more cautious approach, particularly when that data wasn't there?
Well, I think what's really important is that we do it across the United Kingdom. I think we should all be working together on this. The coronavirus knows no difference between boundaries, and we should all be working together. So any way that we can work together must be applauded. Now, that doesn't mean that specific areas of concern within Scotland can't be addressed by the Scottish Government, who are responsible for our health. But I think as a generality, we should be working together, and playing politics with a disease is not something that I've ever done and will ever do, and I hope no one else does it either.
And just very, very finally, looking ahead to 2022 with politics and what may well play out, clearly it was a very difficult end for the year for the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, for effectively, the national leader of the Conservative Party across the UK. Do you expect him to change? Do you expect this government potentially to get its act together a bit more in this new year? Do you hope that might well happen, considering how, I'd say, critical the leader in Scotland has been?
Well, I think what's really important in Scotland is we are the official opposition, and we are providing an opposition to a government that is focused on one thing, which is independence. And therefore, I will work with any part of the United Kingdom and anyone within the United Kingdom that wants to keep the United Kingdom together. And I will do that in the best interests of Scotland. And so anyone who can support us in our wish and in our ability to be a good opposition is obviously an ally, and I'd want to work with them.
OK, Sir Edward Martin, appreciate your time. Happy New Year again. That's the MSP there, Scottish MSP for the Highlands and Islands, Sir Edward Martin, joining us from Scotland. OK, we're going to take a quick break here on GB News and The Briefing. But coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to go to Europe, find out what the latest is there with, of course, surging COVID cases across much of the continent, but also increased travel restrictions. We'll have the latest from Berlin about the situation in Europe and a lot more in just a couple of minutes.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Very welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. It is 20 minutes to 4 o'clock. Just bring you up to date with the fact that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson speaking this afternoon, warning that the NHS faces considerable pressure over the coming weeks. He says that, while this new variant, Omicron, is milder, it is leading still to hospitalisations across the country. He also ruled out a reduction, and we've seen this in the United States, haven't we, of the isolation period to 5 days, currently is 7 days in England, claiming that if an infectious person was to return to work while still infectious, it may make things worse. But he also suggests it would be folly to suggest that the coronavirus pandemic is coming to an end, but rather that we are likely to see hospitalisations increase in the days and weeks to come. He was speaking at a vaccination hub in Buckinghamshire earlier. Well, that's the case here in the UK, but of course we're seeing similar scenes across most of the world, not least of all in Europe, where the variant is surging across many parts of the continent, with European nations imposing heavy restrictions, none more so than the Netherlands. It's been in a national lockdown for weeks, and yesterday tensions boiled over in protests across Amsterdam. However, in Germany, there appears to be more optimism in the fight against the new variant, with the German health minister stating that we can get on with our lives, or they can get back to normal in 2022. This comes as from midnight tonight, Germany is reopening its borders for British tourists. Well, join me now to discuss all of this is Berlin correspondent Thomas Sparrow. Good afternoon to you, Thomas, and Happy New Year as well. First of all, let's look at Germany. What are the case levels like there? Doesn't seem to have kind of taken off to the degree that we've seen here in the UK or in France, for example.
It does seem that that's the case. According to German officials, there have been around 30,000 cases of the Omicron variant, and that has already prompted some new restrictions here in the country. So, for example, when the Bundesliga, the German football league, returns after its winter break later on this week, they will do so with empty stadiums. However, it's important to stress that the picture is a very unclear one, and that's why German officials are stressing, and they've stressed that time and time again, that over the Christmas holidays, during the holiday period, not every district in Germany actually registers the numbers of positive cases, and this leads to a false sense of security, a false sense that numbers are actually going down. And it's only in the next few days, and maybe even only in the next few weeks, that German officials will actually know the real situation in this country. In other words, how bad the situation is and to what extent the Omicron variant is playing an important role, as it has done in other countries in Europe. It's also important to stress, Darren, that this is under no circumstance a situation that only affects Germany. There are various other European countries affected by this. You mentioned the Netherlands as well, where there were protests. Here in Germany, there have also been certain protests, not very big ones, very localized protests. In certain cases, they've turned also violent. And this is a matter that is obviously of concern for German authorities as they try to make sure that people increase the vaccination uptake. That is a big matter of concern here in Germany, because you have over 20 million people who have still not had a coronavirus vaccine.
Some of those protests that we saw in the Netherlands yesterday. Thomas, let's look, if we can, at the travel situation, because interestingly, Germany seems to be easing its travel restrictions for us Brits. That is in contrast to France, where very much we are not welcome still. The travel situation at the start of 2020, as difficult as it ever has been.
It is certainly difficult. Germany at the end of last year described the United Kingdom, or actually put the United Kingdom, as a virus variant country, which basically is the strictest restriction in the German health list. And this is ending today at midnight. So basically the United Kingdom, as of tomorrow, will be a high-risk nation. And that essentially means that UK tourists will be able to travel to Germany without needing to quarantine for a long time if they are fully vaccinated or if they are tested. So basically, this refers to that restriction that was announced at the end of the year and that was announced until the 3rd of January. However, German health officials have stressed in writing that this could change very soon again. And that essentially depends, on the one hand, on the situation in the United Kingdom and how Omicron continues to affect public life there, but also what happens here in the country when they know more certainly how bad the situation is and what role Omicron plays in all this as well.
Let's look beyond, if we can, the coronavirus crisis and politics more generally, Thomas. Of course, France is now, aren't they, essentially leading up when it comes to European affairs for the next 6 months. They're holding the presidency of the European Council. And we've got a new German Chancellor, a new German government after the deal before Christmas. What are we likely to see, kind of that new making in many regards between the two most powerful nations in the EU?
Well, if you ask German officials, they will stress, they did it all along as well under Angela Merkel, and Olaf Scholz has been no different in that regard, that they want to make sure that the German-French alliance is the best possible, and they want to really reinforce the deal between France and Germany. But there are issues where France and Germany do not necessarily see eye to eye. And one issue has been very evident in the last few days. That's the issue of nuclear power here in Germany. Germany recently, only a few days ago, closed 3 of its remaining 6 nuclear power plants. And in fact, the German government only today stressed that they believe that nuclear power is dangerous, that the issue of waste removal is still unresolved. And that certainly is not how other European countries, and not even how the European Commission seems to see the issue of nuclear power. So this will certainly be an interesting challenge for Germany's new government under Olaf Scholz, specifically when he meets other European partners who view the issue of nuclear power very different.
And just very finally, Thomas, before we let you go, what is that relationship like between Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron? We know Emmanuel Macron got on very well, didn't he, with Angela Merkel. Do we have a sense of how this relationship might well play out, given that it's still pretty likely that Emmanuel Macron will win that election later this year in France?
It's important to stress that Olaf Scholz is not a newcomer here in German politics. He was the vice chancellor under Angela Merkel. He was the finance minister there as well. So he has already played for a long time a very important role in German politics. And as such, he already knew Emmanuel Macron as well. So I don't expect any major change in German policy towards France coming from Olaf Scholz. And I also expect that relationship at least to develop further between the two leaders. Obviously, it depends on how the concrete issues develop in the next few months and in the next few years. But again, if you read what commentators are saying here, or if you even look at what the German government has been saying, they believe that the relationship between the two leaders and more generally between the two countries is strong. And from a German perspective, they certainly want to strengthen them even further.
OK, Thomas, appreciate your time. As I say, Happy New Year to you. Take care. We'll speak to you soon. Thomas Barrow there joining us from Berlin with the situation across Europe. Now, let's come closer to home, because it's been a big year for Northern Ireland. Loyalist riots in April, debates on the Northern Irish Protocol, and restrictions after restrictions on things like mask, hospitality and socialising across Ulster. But is there hope for the province in 2022 as it heads, of course, into a May election for the Northern Irish Assembly? Well, our correspondent, Dougie Beattie, has been on the ground and sent us back this report.
Does anybody here or anywhere else in Northern Ireland who has any basic understanding of Irish history think it would be a good idea to put border posts on the island of Ireland? I'm not sure they do.
This is not the way forward. Politics is how we're going to resolve these issues around the protocol. We're making progress. We didn't have violence over the summer, and that's when we made the progress.
Government needs to take a hold of this situation, recognise what they've done, and if they didn't intend to subjugate the Act of Union, then they need to reverse it by repudiating the protocol.
So the principle is that's important to unions, and we want the substance put back in now, which would balance then, any agreement.
2021 has seen political understanding set back 20 years. Arguments over the protocol, culture and the past now dominate our headlines and feature highly in our courts. The lack of clear direction around COVID and the hospitality business has been an embarrassment for this executive.
Pre-COVID, we're Northern Ireland's fourth largest private sector employer by a third of all Northern agri-food, account for 2/3 of tourism spend. Today, we estimate just in the Christmas period alone, our industry has lost between 250 to 300 million. That's the money that carries us through January and February. We are officially open, but effectively closed.
Wholesalers and retailers also struggle to see the wisdom in a government controlled by a huge public sector and no clear lines of communication or planning.
Unfortunately, the worst jurisdiction has been the Northern Ireland Executive. It's the not knowing is the hardest part for us as businesses. They don't understand that hospitality has a supply chain behind that, be it food, drink, whatever, fresh veg, fresh food, and we have to try and plan, and without any kind of level of guidance or thought process, that is very, very difficult. Throughout this pandemic, we haven't even had rates relief in our business as a food wholesaler. From all of those lockdowns, the amount of lost stock is in the tens of thousands of pounds for us as a business. And the view has been, well, that's a too difficult box to tick, so we just have to deal with that.
Inflation is causing huge problems, especially in farming. Farmers are asking for flexibility around legislation to cushion the financial shocks around fuel, fertiliser and feed.
It's coming out of a pandemic. I think the rules and regulations would need to be eased. They weren't enforced during the pandemic. Our inspections were eased off till 2 years, 3-year period, similar till MOTs and cars. The pandemic has actually showed us that these things can be eased off. They don't have to be done every year, that the rules and regulations and stipulations, they don't have to be enforced till such a degree that it's crippling us.
2022 is an election year and all parties are now playing to their electorate. That means very little will be achieved and nationalists will be pushing for this election to be turned into a border poll. This is the Irish border. Right now, I'm in the EU, and across that stretch of water behind me is the UK. This piece of land has been fought upon for generations. Now it's about to be fought over, and not by those who can't decide the rules of how to worship the same God, but by those who can't decide the rules of how to trade with the same people. The Irish roads between the UK and the EU have no border posts, and only small signs telling you about your speed limits, letting you know if you're in kilometres or miles per hour. Northern Ireland is part of the 5th largest economy in the world. The UK's gross domestic product is in around $3 trillion. The Republic of Ireland is $388 billion, and about 20% of that comes from Britain. As elections come into view, will it be COVID, the protocol, or the border poll that dominate? Dougie Beattie, GB News, on the Irish border.
And of course, those Northern Irish elections taking place there in May, and we'll have coverage here on GB News. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch today with the programme, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Michelle says, Tom Hunt, that was the Conservative MP we had on earlier, is making sense. We do really need to find a compromise in protecting people and living a normal life. Laura says, I completely agree with the views of Tom Hunt. No more COVID restrictions, lockdowns or masks for children in schools. The isolation period should be reduced to 5 days maximum immediately. James says no one wants more lockdowns. However, we do need to recognise that for the foreseeable, COVID will pose a threat to society. We must at times be willing to do things such as wear masks and use vaccine passports. And Jane's got in touch saying it's good to see travel potentially opening up again. The industry has been hit particularly hard by COVID. Interestingly, we may well hear from the government actually in the coming days that they're going to stop the need to have a PCR test before you arrive back into the UK, which clearly could help the tourism industry. Always get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at GB News. But that is it for me for the briefing for this afternoon. I'm back again at 3 tomorrow, not just on TV, but on the radio too. Up next, it's Colin Brazier with Brazier. But before all that, let's bring you up to date with the Bank Holiday Monday weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Well, let's bring you up to date with the weather right across the UK. Largely dry in the south with some rain and hill snow further north. Let's zoom in to the southwest of England. And whilst it'll be largely dry there, it will be rather cloudy this evening. Remaining mild, though, with temperatures, as you can see there, still in double figures. The southeast of England and East Anglia will also be dry this evening. But again, there will be a fair amount of cloud across the area. Temperatures in London at around 11 degrees Celsius. There'll be outbreaks of some rain across Wales as we end Monday, but northern areas will also see some clear spells develop around 10 degrees in Cardiff. The Midlands this evening should be largely dry, although southern areas will remain cloudy and mild. The North Midlands may well see some clear spells, but they will be a little colder. Temperatures there on Tuesday, though, in Birmingham down to 4 degrees. Moving up to northern England, we'll see a band of rain and hill snow move southwards across the area behind the rain. It will turn much colder than of late. Temperatures on Tuesday down to 3 degrees in Newcastle. The cold air will already be across Scotland with some blustery wintry showers across the north, giving the risk of some icy patches here. Further south will be dry, but quickly turning to frosts. The clear but colder weather will also spread across Northern Ireland this evening, with any rain quickly easing across the south of the country. A few showers may follow across the north coast. That is how the weather is looking across the United Kingdom as we head into Monday evening and the wee small hours of Tuesday morning. The overall picture is that while the rain may move away, the temperatures will drop and it'll get much colder.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against